Well, I'm ready to start thinking carefully about piece movement in a more realistic game environment. Hi, this is Ralph for the Prineville Chess Club. In this video, we're going to play a game against one of the bots, one of the beginner bots over on chess.com, and really start to put to the test piece movement. And I'm going to start off by playing beginner bot Martin. It says, what is it? Здравствуйте, which is hello. And this beginner bot is rated only 250. That's a relatively low beginner score. But we're going to focus on piece movement on here. Now you can't see this, but I'm going to choose to play white. When you play a bot, you can choose white or black or some kind of random where it'll give it to you. I'm going to play white, and I'm going to go ahead and start that game. Now playing bots isn't necessarily the best way to improve your chess overall, especially for gameplay and tactics, because bots will often make kind of pretty weird blunders and bad moves. However, I do think there's value in playing the bots if you focus on your own ideas, your own movements, and things like that. Are you looking over at your options? Are you calculating several moves, sequences on what the opponent may or may not do, and things like that? So it is still probably best, not probably, it is still best to play real games as often as possible and study those real games, but there can be value from playing bots as well. The other thing I like about playing bots is we don't have to worry about the time. The bot opponent always will make a move very fast, so that gives you plenty of time to look over your opponent's move, your response, your attacking ideas, and things like that. Well, I'm white in this game, and I get to move first. And remember, our pawns can move forward one or two squares. They can only move 2 squares on their very first move. And for me, and for a lot of players, moving their king pawn 2 squares to e4 is incredibly popular. Probably the most common starting move. Now, because I'm in a more realistic game, I don't see the engine anymore. When I was first looking at how the pieces move, I was using an analysis board on chess.com, which provides engine suggestions for the next best move. But once you start playing realistic or real games, you don't have access to an engine. So you make moves that make sense to you, which are legal, of course, and then you study those after the fact to see, hey, did I move the best piece in the best way in that particular position? But remember, our goal for this video, for this exercise, is really just to make sure we are practicing piece movement. Now, black responded with c6. That's a Caro-Kann opening, Caro-Kann defense, since they're black. And in many of the chess engines, especially online, they'll tell you what this opening is, and that's showing up on my recorder. Yeah, so this is the Caro-Kann defense with black. They are attacking the center, but they're attacking it a little bit from the side. They're also moving this c6, this pawn to c6, because they have intentions of moving their d pawn to d5, and it's going to have support there. Okay, so I moved a pawn 2 squares because I was allowed to. They moved their pawn 1 square because they're allowed to. I'm ready to respond. And I'm still going to move a pawn forward 2 squares because I want to see how many squares I can control in the center. Now black responded with e6. Okay, maybe not necessarily the best move. A more common move would have been d5, but that's okay. Martin is learning chess just like we are. All right, I'm ready to start moving. I'm ready to move a knight. Remember, knights move in those weird L patterns. Unless I had a really good logical reason, I'm going to avoid moving my knight to the edge of the board. Sometimes that's the best thing to do temporarily, but knights do so much better in the center. So I'm going to take my G knight and move it to F3 so that it starts to look at more central squares, particularly these 2 center squares here. I want to have good center control. Now, why did I move my king knight, kingside knight, versus my queenside knight? Well, I like to castle. Castle means I get to move my king 2 squares over and move the rook to the opposite side of the king, and I can castle a little bit more quickly over here on the king side, and it kind of gets my rook in a very good position. Now sometimes castling long or castling on the queen side is the better way to go, but there are 3 pieces between my king and rook on the queen side, where there's only 2 pieces between my king and rook on the king side. And in order to castle, there can't be any pieces in between the king and the rook. So therefore I can castle a little bit more quickly on the king side, and that probably is the most common side to castle on. It's called short castling or castling short because it's a shorter distance for that movement. Now Martin responded with an h5 move. Okay, that's kind of a weird move. It's not a central move. It's not attacking. It's not, guarding or attacking anything in the center. It's not taking over control of the center of the board, which is typically what you want to do. But maybe Martin is going with the premise that white has pretty good central control, and if white has good central control, maybe black is going to try to make moves along the sides, and that can be logical sometimes. However, this pawn move isn't doing anything to prevent my development, and I do want to develop. I've developed my kingside knight. I do want to develop my kingside bishop as well so that I can castle sooner rather than later. Am I worried about black's push here? Not quite yet. So I'm going to get this bishop out of the way. And I can move my bishop along this diagonal. Now, of course, these squares over here, got too many red squares going on. These diagonal squares would not be good for me because they're both guarded by black pawns. So that wouldn't be a great place for me to move my bishop. So effectively, I really only have a couple of places I can move to. I can move to either of these 3 squares. Well, I do want to kind of get this bishop out. I think I'm going to start off just by moving my bishop right here. I'm developing the bishop. I'm giving myself room to castle when I'm ready. And now I can start to think about that. Remember, one of the nice things about playing these bots is they will make their move right away. So you don't have to sit there and wait for them to think. Okay, black has moved to pawn to d5. They move their pawn 2 squares, which they're allowed to do. First time you move a pawn, it can be moved 2 squares. They are attacking my pawn, but my pawn is defended by my bishop. So I'm not so worried about that. So I'm going to go ahead and castle. This is great. I should be able to castle here. I take my king and I move it 2 squares to the right, and the rook automatically moves to the opposite side of that king. That's a kingside castle, or castling short. Okay, black made a big pawn move. Now, that's a pretty good move, right? Because they're really guarding some squares over here. They're limiting where my bishop can go. Let's see. I think I am going to push a pawn as well. Just 1 square. Just to kind of limit some of the scope of their black bishop, so their black bishop can't come out here. I'll try to prevent that by having my pawn there. And I see, boy, they're really making a move over here on the king side. They see that I've castled on the king side, so they're starting to push some pawns over on this side. Sometimes 1 pawn move, sometimes 2 pawn movements, but they're making a push on here. Now, black is making a relatively common beginner mistake, though. They are pushing pawns frequently, and they're not developing their pieces. All of their pieces are on their home ranks, all in their starting positions. And if you leave your pieces there, that means they're not fighting. That means they're not taking control of the center. It also means that black can't castle because those pieces need to be removed or moved from between the king and the rook. So black side can't castle. And since they're not developing, I'm going to keep developing. And I think I'm going to get this bishop out of the way and get it off of its starting square. And I'm going to develop with tempo. I'm going to develop my bishop all the way over here so that it is developed off of its starting square. Sorry, just going to move my camera a little bit there. And I was also attacking the black queen. Black decided to move their queen away from the attack. They could have considered developing a bishop and blocking my attack, or developing a knight and blocking my attack, but they chose to move their queen. I'm going to attack their queen again, but this time I'm going to move my e-pawn forward one position. And remember, pawns attack at a diagonal, so I've attacked their black queen, and this is one of the drawbacks of playing a bot. They will make really bad illogical blunders. Okay, fair enough. Instead of black moving their queen to safety, which they had to do really, in fact they only had one square they could have moved to. I guess technically they could have moved backwards. They could have moved their queen back one, or off here to the side one. They chose to move a king one position. This is really never done unless there's a really good reason to do so. By moving their king, they are, I guess, technically protecting their queen, or they can take back. They're not protecting the queen. They can take back, but they've also taken away their rights to castle. In addition to there being no pieces in between the king and the rook, when you want a castle, you can't have moved that king or that rook. So by forcing or having your opponent move their king early, you've taken away their rights to castle. And that's often a good thing to do if you can. Well, this was a pretty bad blunder for Martin here, so I'm going to take this queen. Queen is the most high-valued piece, I guess, except for the king, that is. The queen is worth about 9 points, and a pawn is worth a measly 1 point. So if you can take a high-value piece with a much lower-value piece, it's almost always a smart decision. Yep, Martin says, there goes my best piece. For sure, the queen is the best, most movable, most powerful attacking piece. They retook the pawn with the bishop, but I'm up. You can just barely see this, but I'm up 8 points of material in the game. I took a queen, which was worth 9, and I lost a pawn, which is worth 1. Therefore, I'm up a total of 8, 9 minus the 1. Okay, well, I'm ready to keep developing. Let's see, I am going to develop... I want to develop my knight over here on B, but I am noticing I might have some challenges with this bishop. If I do something other than move this bishop or do something with this bishop, I do have a potential issue. If I don't move that bishop, black can move their pawn forward one move, attacking my bishop. And I don't want to take the pawn because their knight is defending that square. So in order to protect my bishop, I might have to move it back. And if I move it back to h4, they could move their g-pawn forward, attacking my bishop again. And I'm going to start to run out of squares, and I could potentially get my bishop trapped. So that's kind of dangerous. But I'm still going to ignore that situation, and I'm going to move a knight, and I'm going to move a knight to a more central location, knight to d2. They didn't try to trap my bishop like they might have had potential to do. They chose to develop a piece, okay? Now I am going to develop this, or move this knight again to b3. Remember those little L patterns? Now black decided to take my h2 pawn, but this is the opposite of what you want to do in most situations. They used a 3-point piece to capture a 1-point pawn. So you would prefer to take a high-value piece with a low-value piece. You do not want to take a low-value piece with a high-value piece because I can easily recapture. So remember, I was up 8, I'm now up 10 because I took a 3-point bishop and I only had to give up, or lost, a 1-point pawn. So that adds another 2 points of material being up in my position. So things are going really well. All right, I'm ready to move more pieces out. You know what I really see? I want to move my knight to c5. I like this square for a couple of reasons. By moving my knight to c5, it's protected by my pawn on d4, and this is a dark square. There's no dark square bishop on black's side, which means they can't use a bishop to hassle my knight. There's also no pawn that can hassle my knight. The only piece that would annoy my knight is their knight. You know, if they were to move their knight here, that would potentially affect or impact my decisions related to my knight. But that's a pretty good place or square to just sit on with my knight. And I'm looking at a lot of black's side of the board. Including looking at a bishop. So I feel pretty good about where that knight is located. I've got most of my pieces developed. I think I want to move more pieces out. My queen is still on its starting square. Where can I move my queen someplace effective? Let's see. Not seeing a great, well, there's plenty of great spots, I suppose. So without really knowing where I want to move this queen to first, I'm going to move this queen right here. Remember, queens can move straight lines or they can move diagonals. Now, if I want to get this queen developed and away from its starting position, I could have moved it up here to b3, or I could have moved it off to the right. e2, f3. I don't want to move it there because a pawn would take it. So I'm going to, you know what? Problem with me moving my queen to f3 is that takes away a square for my knight. And I don't want to leave my knight on the edge of the board like this. You know what? I'm going to move my knight back. It did its job. It took that bishop. And now I'm going to move my queen up to c2. It's called a battery. When you get a queen and a bishop lined up on the same diagonal, they can kind of really target things over here. I don't necessarily want to take over here, but I could. Now, this is a mistake by Martin, the bot, because they moved this pawn forward, and I happen to have, let's get rid of these lines. I have two attackers on this pawn that they just moved forward, and they only have one defender, which means I can take this pawn without worrying about being retaken. So I am going to take with my bishop. My bishop is protected by the knight, so I wasn't worried about it being captured. And now I'm going to bring a rook out to a semi-open file. Rooks like to be on open files. However, because there's a pawn here on e6, this is not truly an open file. It's a semi-open file. Black's rook took my bishop. I'm going to take back. It's called being up the exchange. I lost a 3-point bishop, but I gained a 5-point rook from the opponent's side, which means I'm up 2 more pieces of material, or 2 more points of material. They've moved their bishop into another target zone. I'm going to grab that bishop with my knight. That's an even exchange. I'm taking a 3-point bishop with a 3-point knight. And I'm just trading down. I'm trying to remove pieces from black's side so that I'm left with more pieces than they have, which makes it easier for me to checkmate their king. Now, they still have quite a few pawns, right? They've got 4, 7. They still have 7 pawns, whereas I have 6 pawns. And their pawns are really guarding a lot of squares. I need to start getting rid of some of these pawns. And I'm going to do something called a sacrifice. I'm going to intentionally give up more points of material than I'm going to get back. But there's a benefit to what I'm about to do. I'm going to use a 3-point bishop to take a 1-point pawn. Now, when I do this, what I expect black to do is take my bishop with their pawn, and then I'm going to use my queen to take that pawn. So I will be giving up a 3-point bishop, but I'll be gaining 2 points of pawn material. I'm still down. I'm down 1 point in that, but that is going to open up black's side. It's also going to get my queen into a really good spot to start forking and gobbling up more pieces of material. So a sack or sacrifice is when you give up material for an immediate or longer range benefit down the road. And the benefit doesn't always have to be material. The benefit could be position. So I'm going to take with my bishop. Let's see if Martin takes back. They do. Great. And that's probably what they should have done. Now my queen will take this. So I've lost a little bit of material, but I'm still up overall. But now my queen is in a fantastic position to start gobbling up more material. For instance, the queen can now take the 3-point knight or the 1-point pawn. I'm going to take the 3-point knight. Okay, I can start to take more material. I'm going to take with my rook. Rook's moving those straight lines. Now let's see if we can do something interesting here. I'm going to try this. Let's see if they catch me. I'm going to move my queen here, and I'm pinning this pawn. Okay, now a pin is when a piece or pawn is locked into position. It can't be moved because a high value piece is behind it. So my queen was kind of targeting the king, x-raying the king through this pinned piece. And a smart way to break the pin is to move the king out of the way. And so the pawn is no longer pinned. All right, fair enough. Let's see. I am going to check the king with my pawn by moving this pawn 2 places. Remember, pawns attack in a diagonal, so the king is in check. Hey, and this pawn is now pinned again. The king is on the same row or rank as my queen. Now, what's great about pinned pieces is pinned pieces can't move. It's like the pinned piece is just locked into place. So I can do something kind of interesting here. My rook can take this d5 pawn, and black cannot take back with their pawn because their pawn is pinned. Pinned pieces can't be moved. So I can take this rook, or I'm sorry, my rook can take that pawn safely. And it's still in no danger. The pawn is still pinned. It can't move. So I'm in no rush to move my rook out of danger because it's not in danger. All right, I'm going to make more moves. I'm going to push my A pawn 2 pieces forward. Now, yes, it can be taken. Well, they chose not to do that. They chose to take a 3-point piece and grab a pawn. So I'm going to take their knight at a diagonal. Their pawn took my pawn at a diagonal. Great. My rook can move ahead. And now we're starting to get into a pretty interesting situation where, okay, I think Martin's days are numbered here. My rooks are kind of really blocking a lot of movement to this king. And they just moved their rook out to a place where I can just grab it. I should be careful about stalemate. Stalemate is when your opponent cannot make a legal move. Fortunately, my opponent can still make a couple of legal moves. So even if I take this rook on the back rank, they can move their king to a couple of squares, and they could have moved their pawn a couple of times too. So they still had some legal moves to make. All right, do I have a checkmate? Checkmate is when you check your king and they can't get out of it. They can't move their king out of check. They can't block the check, or they can't take the piece that's checking them. Then it's checkmate. So let's see. Do I have a checkmate? Now, if I move my queen to c8, I'm checking the king, but it could effectively move backward. Okay. I shouldn't say backward, it would be moving forward to black's perspective. So they could get out of check pretty easily. Is that the best thing that I can do? Yeah, maybe, maybe not. Let's see. I'm going to move my queen to d7. This also checks the black king, and they can only move that one piece forward. Now I think I might actually have a checkmate. So if I move my rook from d8 to b8, I'm checking the black king. Can the black king escape? I don't think it can. So if I move my king, or if I move my rook to check there, the king cannot move backwards because my queen is guarding those squares. It can't move to the side because my rook is guarding those squares. It can't move forward because my b rook will be guarding that square. And it can't move to this square because my pawns are guarding those. And since the king can't move out of check, it can't block the check, and it can't take the checking piece, that would be checkmate. So I think that was a pretty good example of moving all of the pieces in pretty consistent ways. We saw piece movement, all the piece movement, including a short, castling short. So that's really the focus that I wanted to do on this particular video. Now, even when you're playing a bot, it is always nice to hit that game review and see how things look. And what you want to keep an eye on when you are doing a game review, and we'll do more of these in future videos, and we'll do more of these with realistic games, with real people, so that we can kind of see how things go. And here's kind of some of the stuff you want to look at. Accuracy can be a pretty telling number. I guess kind of like grading scale in school. So I got an 87%, so that's a B+. So that's pretty good accuracy. But this is also good down here, these numbers, and you cannot really see all of this, so let me move them up a little bit higher. So we can see that I didn't make any blunders. You want to try to avoid blunders when all possible. Blunders are a perfectly natural form of the game. Now, part of the reason I didn't make any blunders here is because I didn't have time pressure on this game. Real games with time pressure leads to more blunders. So giving yourself plenty of time, or as much time as you can in a game, is a great way to minimize blunders. Misses are when you miss an opportunity to checkmate your opponent or do a really good move like capturing a piece, an undefended piece. Looks like I didn't have any misses. I didn't have any mistakes. And I made a dozen best moves. Best moves might be top engine moves and things like that. Now, this is pretty good, but again, this was not a realistic game. It's a bot. But we use this game so that we could practice piece movement and also factor in piece movement in making some pretty good decisions while we're playing. As we play harder bots and as we play real people, then of course, we're going to start to see a little bit more variation in there. We will make more mistakes. Sometimes we're going to miss things. Sometimes we're going to blunder stuff. And who knows, sometimes we're going to make great moves and brilliant moves as well. And we'll always do our best to improve our average accuracy over time. So if occasionally we might have a game where our accuracy is low, maybe 60% or lower, but we'll try to follow those games up with several that are higher accuracy in the 70s and 80s and perhaps even into the 90s. Okay, my friends, thank you for your time, and of course, keep practicing piece movement in your future games. Take care.